Today what we're going to do in this video is we're going to go over weapons as a kind of blanket labeling. There's three different main types of weapons on the Warframe level, which is a primary weapon, which is most of your rifles and shotguns and snipers and that sort of thing, your rocket launchers and grenade launchers and laser guns and bows and ballistas, and there's a lot of different types of guns. But if it's something that would be a primary gun, it is like a main gun in consideration. Next up there is your secondary guns, which are generally pistols. It might be a various form of a pistol, but it is generally overwhelmingly pistols. There is some other squeaky little fun guys in here. There's throwing stars and throwing knives and little arm lasers and little hand grenade launchers or little hand crossbows. So there's still some variety in here. But these are all your more small scale weapons, if you will, and if you want to think of it in terms of size of things. These are things that you would use in one hand, or two of in one in each hand. Is there kind of a backup weapon generally in thought. And then of course you have your melee weapons. Melee weapons go all across the board, and there's staves, there's spear type glaive deals, there's punching weapons, there's kung fu style punching where it actually gets your feet involved, there's whips, there's swords, there's katanas, there's daggers, there's dual swords, there's dual axes, there's single axes, there's hammers, there's kamas, there's throwing glaives, there's a gun blade, there's maces. There's a lot of different types of melee weapons in here. Right there is actually the gun blade, if you were interested in what they made that look like. And all of these settings are actually consistently and constantly growing as they put out more and more content. So just because a weapon isn't in there now doesn't mean it won't be in there later. The gunblade is a relatively new addition. It didn't used to be there, but it is now. And then every type of melee weapon also has stances associated with it, and I kind of went over the stances in the mod tutorial, so I won't get too much into that. This is more about the actual weapons, and not necessarily so much about the weapon itself, like, oh, these are the primary weapons, like I just went over, but more about what all these numbers and everything on a weapon means. Now, there's a couple of different types of firing modes to begin with. Some guns, like the Boltor Prime here, are auto and trigger. And you can see the trigger right up in this little stat block to the right. It'll give you the name, it'll give you the default damage types and default damage amounts. It'll tell you the trigger, which is either auto, which if you hold down the button to fire, it will continually shoot until it has to reload. There is also held, which in the case of some weapons, you hold down the weapon and it will continually fire. And these are more commonly known as, to most people, continuous fire weapons. For instance, this flux rifle right here actually shoots out a consistent laser beam. So if you hold down the trigger, instead of doing multiple shots like a full auto gun does, although it still has the same effect on your ammo, really, it's just one straight big beam. So you can kind of almost think of it as a, you know, oversized thin sword of sorts that you shoot. Then of course you have your semi-auto, you have your burst. Semi-auto, of course, every time you click the button it will shoot. If you hold down the button it doesn't do anything. The burst fires will fire a succession of shots every time you tap the trigger. The amount of shots will change from weapon to weapon. Some do 2 bursts, some do 3, some do 5s. And then you also have charge weapons, which when you hold down the trigger it'll actually fill the circle around your cursor. When that cursor circle is filled, then you can fire for maximum effect. Or in the case of some, it has to be fully done in order to shoot, or as soon as it is fully charged it will shoot. So there's still a little bit of variation between the different fire types, or weapon firing types, I should say, triggers, if you will, and how they function, because they are relatively unique amongst themselves. I mean, you have your normal guns that shoot, you have your normal guns that shoot lasers, you have your arrows, you have your rockets, and then the actual weapon types themselves within the primary, such as your shotguns or your rifles or your sniper rifles or your bows, and those will have an effect more on what mods can go into it, because a shotgun can't use rifle. We went over that already. But also what ammo type it uses. A Sobek, being a shotgun, will use shotgun ammo. So if you see a shotgun ammo drop, which if I remember correctly is green, then it will refill your shotgun ammo. If you have a normal rifle, like the Tiburon, then you're going to have your rifle ammo drops all over the place, because it's a much more common thing that drops. And then if you have something like your Vectis, which is a sniper rifle and uses purple ammo, you won't be finding nearly as much of it. It doesn't drop as often. So there is a little bit of a ammo quirk, if you will, for the different weapons that are going to kind of help you think of what you have to do. Because if you go with a weapon such as the Gorgon, which is like a heavy machine gun, almost like a minigun, in which case it has a small spool up time. It's a fully auto gun, and you're going to end up holding down that trigger because you like that fire rate. You'll go through a lot of ammo with it. Since it's a rifle, a lot of rifle ammo gets dropped, so there's a better chance you'll keep finding ammo for it than, say, a sniper rifle, where if you are shooting your Vectis like crazy, you might not be finding the ammo to replace it in a match. Of course, the other side of this is, of course, the guns with highest fire rates, such as the Boltor Prime or the Gorgon, will end up running out of ammo more often because you're just burning through so much ammo. This also is something that occurs with a lot of low damage weapons if you go to the higher places, because it takes more rounds to kill stuff. So there's all kinds of little quirks to different weapons. But let's pick one here and we'll get into it a little bit more. Let's just start off with something nice and easy, like the Karak. Looks like a general rifle. It is just general rifle. If we go into upgrade, we will actually see stats for this. Granted, if you just hover over it, you will also see stats appear down there. But for getting rid of all the stats from our Warframe and stuff, we're going to just simplify it by going in here. Now, over here, right where my Warframe's head is and kind of is looking, is all of the actual stats relative to your gun. In the case of the Conclave rating, which goes to the PvP, the first number is what it's getting from your gun, the second number is your overall rate. Doesn't really matter too much unless the alerts or the PvP, as I've mentioned in the mod video. The accuracy of the weapon, of course, the higher the accuracy, the more often it's going to hit right where your cursor is pointing. And this comes more into play with longer distance shots. A less accurate weapon shooting at something further away is going to have a harder time actually landing that shot where you want to. This can be a little bit tricky with some weapons, because some weapons do have a bit of an arc to them, like the bows, where the bullets will actually have a drop-off, or arrows in this case will have a drop-off, so you have to take in gravity a little bit into effect when you're firing them. There is a critical chance. Now, this critical chance is not quite like your normal, what you would expect out of a critical. Most times when it comes to criticals, you have the critical chance of hitting it, which is exactly what you think. The chance of, per hit, getting a critical, which will do extra damage. In the case of this one, it's just 2.5%. It's not really a whole lot. But if you do get that critical hit, you would then move down to a critical multiplier, whereas where it's a little bit different from other games, because different weapons will have different base multipliers for their criticals. So instead of just you have a critical, it does ×2 damage, it really depends on what weapon you're using. In the case of the Karak, it's 1.5 times damage. So if I hit a critical, it'll just multiply whatever my damage would be times 1.5. Pretty straightforward. The fire rate is kind of the, shots per minute going on. The higher the number, the faster it shoots, meaning the more lead you're flinging, or lasers, or arrows, or whichever, down range. This can change a little bit for some things, like the bows have slightly different mechanics, where the reload and the fire rate are all kind of worked into how quick they will bring the arrow to the bow and how quick that charge will be. And fire rate is kind of generally how quick things will charge if it doesn't have an actual firing rate, as in how many bullets per minute I can throw downrange. Magazine will tell you how many rounds are in the magazine. The ammo pool itself, the total ammo pool, isn't actually displayed anywhere, but it's generally the same for each weapon type. So rifles will normally have, if I remember right, about 540 rounds. Shotguns will have less. Snipers will have in the range somewhere between like 50 to 90 or whatever. There's kind of a general rule of thumb that the weapons will follow for their ammo capacities when it comes to maximum ammo. But the magazines can be all across the board. Sometimes you'll have a gun that's a bow or the bolt-action rifle style deal, where you're only going to have one round in the magazine, and it's going to have to get reloaded every time. Other times you'll have 30-round magazines, 20-round magazines. The Gorgon has a 100-round magazine. And the magazine also kind of ties into reload, which is how many seconds it takes to reload your gun. A lot of times you'll see if I have a huge magazine in a gun, it ends up taking a very long time to reload. And this is kind of like a, give or take balance situation. I have 100 rounds that I can throw at people, but as soon as I run out, I'm out of the fight for a while as I reload this gun. In the case of the Karak, 30 rounds, and then after I hit that reload button, it's going to be 2 seconds before I'm firing any more rounds. Status percent chance is on a hit what chance there is of any statuses from your damage types taking effect. For instance, slash damage, if the status procs on that, will cause bleeding. There's also the elemental effects from your mods, such as heat causing people to burn and light on fire, or toxin kind of causing people to get poisoned. So there's a couple of different statuses that could happen, and this is just a chance of one of them happening. So if you have, say, a 50% status chance, then give or take every other hit is going to cause some kind of a status effect. Now this is primarily for the ranged weapons. Pistols are the same way when it comes down to all these numbers. Damage types will change depending on what damage the weapon does. There's impact damage, which is better at some things and worse at others. There's puncture damage and there's slash damage. All of these have different kind of ways of factoring in against enemies. Some enemies are strong against impact, some are weak against impact, and that will alter the damage from your gun against them. But your gun will list all of your default values. Some weapons actually have a strange or odd weapon damage type. For instance, the flux rifle does slash puncture and impact damage, which you would expect, except for it's a laser, so you would kind of expect it to do a little something different. Whereas the Amprex actually shoots lightning, basically, and does electrical damage, which you would also kind of expect. Some weapons will do radiation damage, some will do cold damage, some will do heat damage or blast damage. Blast damage likes to stick around with many of the actual explosive weapons, which kind of makes sense. So there's that aspect of the different weapons too, where some weapons will be better against certain types or certain factions of enemies within the range of enemies you fight because of their damage. And instead of explaining that, it would be much easier to just go to the Wikipedia in this instance in order to look it up, or go to your codex and look at what it says for what their defenses are against. Because it's a lot easier to just look at a list and have me go through and list every single thing just to have you be like, oh, I wonder what this one was, because you forgot what I said because I was blathering on for so long. Now, pistols, like I said, are pretty much the same way when it comes to stats. You have your different damage types, you have your different trigger types, you have your different ammos, and all that good stuff. Next up, differently, would be your melee weapons, which are very similar in theory. I mean, you still have your conclave rating, you still have an attack speed, except for this time it's how many swings you're getting in. And I'm not entirely certain, but I'm pretty sure that the attack speed listed is actually the attack speed of your quick attack, which is if you don't have your weapon equipped or you don't have a stance equipped. Because some stances will modify your attack speed, and I know I have had a couple of weapons where you will just be cruising with your swings when you're doing a quick attack, and then you would actually equip it as your almost primary when you go to, like, you know, blade only mode, if you will, and all of a sudden you're swinging like there's mud surrounding you. So I'm pretty positive that the attack speed is more relevant towards your quick attacks. Channeling cost, channeling for melee weapons is if you hold the key that you have assigned for channeling. In my case, I set it so that it's the same button as quick attack. When you're holding your melee weapon as your actual weapon, not as a quick attack, but if you actually have it set as your weapon and you're holding that, your channeling cost is how much it costs per enemy struck by an attack from your energy pool. So I might have a Warframe that has 100 energy, and if I hit 2 dudes while channeling my sword, I will lose 10 energy. Now, the trade-off of why would I want to do this is channeling damage boost. And this will change between different weapons as well. So in the case of the Dakra Prime that I have right now, I will lose 5 energy per enemy I hit while channeling, but I will gain a 1.5 times damage boost. So this can also be changed by mods and depending on a weapon. Melee weapons also still have channeling or critical attacks, which it's the same functionality as with the normal weapons. There's a percent per hit. It's going to have a chance of criticaling. If it criticals, it does the critical multiplier in damage. And then there's also a couple extra things in here as far as melee specific things. You have a leap attack, which is an attack that can be performed when you're wall running, and it tells you the specific damage done by that. You have a spin attack, which if you are sliding and you do a quick attack, for example, or a normal attack if you're holding the weapon, you will do a spin attack and that has its damage. I should correct myself right here. Leap attack is actually if you jump and attack, as there's a kind of directional attack thing going on. Wall attack is actually down here. Sorry about that. The stamina line right here tells you how much stamina it's draining per swing. So if I swing 3 times, I'm losing 33 stamina. Even if you don't really have the stamina, you can generally still swing your weapon and attack with it. The only major difference is if you have no stamina, you will not be able to sprint away or block with your melee weapon when it's equipped as your primary to stop you from taking damage, because those things do run off of your stamina gauge. And of course you have the breakdown of all the different damage types that you can deal with that given weapon. Now, I do want to mention one thing about criticals before I'm done with this, because you can actually have a higher than 100% critical chance rate. When you're in the game and you shoot somebody, if you have your damage text turned on, a normal hit is going to pop up as a white text. If you score critical, which is anything up to a 100% chance of critical, causing a critical, it will pop up as yellow text. with the critical multiplier of damage factored in. So in the case of my Paris Prime, if I hit somebody and I see a yellow number, I know I'm doing 5.6 times the damage that I would have normally done. For any number above 100%, you are given that amount extra over that 100. So in this case, 12.5%, because it's 112.5 critical chance. So I would have a 12.5% chance of doing a red critical, in which case the text that pops up is red. And I don't know if there's any specific, I mean, I'm sure there's specific math behind it, but I personally do not know what that exact math is. If somebody wants to fill everybody in, they can. I just know that it is a very impressive number in most situations, and the enemies really do not like being hit by these red criticals. It is well above your normal critical multiplier. I don't know for sure if that is, you know, taking the critical multiplied hit and then multiplying it by that again, or if there's a stock rate at which the red criticals are applied. But that is how a red critical will happen, is because you're exceeding the 100% critical chance. At 100%, every hit you have is going to be a yellow critical. So at that point, you have a 12% chance on every hit of having that critical, basically. Status chance, I think the highest I've seen is in the 90s. I do not think it can go over 100%. In the case of this, I have mine up to 98% on this. So almost every single hit I ever have with it will cause some kind of a status proc. But there, as far as I know, it will not actually go over 100. There is no like critical of status effects happening. For what any given element does, I can either make a different video later on, or you can go to the wiki where it'll probably be a lot easier for you to see what it is, because each little proc has its own effect associated with it, like burn damage or poison damage. Some will have health, things like that. Your companions also will have weapons, and these function exactly like a normal weapon for your character. They have accuracy, they have critical rates, reloads, magazines, status percent chances. The only thing that really comes into play with a companion weapon is that if I'm using a shotgun on my companion, and I have my shotgun mods installed into that, and then I equip a shotgun in my main character, they cannot be using the same mods. The same specific mods. If I have 2 rank 5 damage enhancers, I can have one of each of those in both of those shotguns and it'll work fine. But what this is you have these mods installed, and say I have 1 rank 9 damage booster, which for rifles is serration. So let's say I have 1 rank 9 serration. That's the only serration mod I have. I can equip it into my Warframe's rifle or into my Sentinel's rifle. I can't do it into both if I'm going to use both rifles at the same time. You can, however, have it equipped onto your rifle and then change your rifle to something else, like say a shotgun that doesn't have that mod, and you will be able to use that mod on something on your Sentinel, on your companion, because the other one is not in use. So you can only have that one specific mod in use on one item at a time, unless you have 2 copies of that thing made to the same rank. That is how weapons work in the quick layman's overview kind of way. Obviously, each weapon is going to have slightly different, unique aspects to it, especially when it comes to things like charge. The Amprex has like a lightning that arcs out, whereas the Dragoon will actually focus all of its shrapnel that it sprays into a more tight-knit zone. So each weapon has its own primary effect. Some weapons will have a secondary effect. The Buzzlock, for example, will, through if you're looking through the scope of the gun with your alternate fire and then you fire, for a more substantial amount of ammo, it will place a tracer on whatever is hit, and then all of the preceding bullets will follow to that spot regardless of where you're shooting. Some of the other guns, such as the Quanta series, like the Mutualist Quanta or the normal Quanta or even the Parasist, when you actually use your aim button, it won't aim down the gun anymore. It becomes a secondary fire, so it'll do a different thing. Like in the case of the Parasist, it'll shoot out like a hook line. They'll snag dudes and pull them at you. Or in the case of the Quanta or the Mutualist Quanta, it'll shoot out like a little bouncing grenade, basically. So some of the different guns do actually have secondary effects that will replace being able to look down your sights with them. But if you want to know more about the specifics of weapons, I would recommend going to the wiki, because there are far too many weapons for me to cover in one video without all of us just going mental and me being here for all month trying to explain them all, especially since I haven't used all of them, so I couldn't tell you about some of them yet. That's weapons. That's an explanation of all the stats associated with weapons. As always, if you have any questions or any confusion about anything I've said, or even if you just want some, to add something of your own or correct something that I may have said that was wrong, leave a comment and I will either try to address it or fix it or make another video if it's something that needs that much covering. In the meantime, thanks for watching and have a good one.